I must have been 6 or 7 when I lived in Lebanon. The country was ravaged by war at the time, and murders were common and frequent. I remember during a particularly vicious era when the bombings rarely stopped. I would stay at home sitting in front of my television watching a very, very strange show. It was a kids' show that lasted about 30 minutes and contained strange and sinister images. To this day, I believe it was a thinly veiled attempt on the part of the media to use scare tactics to keep children in place. Because the moral of every episode revolved around very uptight ideologies. Stuff like, bad kids stay up late. Bad kids have their hands under the covers when they sleep. And bad kids steal the food from the fridge at night. It was very weird, and in Arabic to top it off. I didn't understand much of it, but for the most part, the images were very graphic and comprehensive. The thing that stuck with me the most, however, was the closing scene. It remained much the same in every episode. The camera would zoom in on an old, rusted, closed door. As it got closer to the door, strange and sometimes even agonizing screams would become more audible. It was extremely frightening, especially for children's programming. Then, a message would appear on the screen in Arabic saying, "That's where bad kids go." Eventually, both the image and the sounds would fade out, and that would be the end of the episode. About 15 or 16 years later, I became a journalistic photographer. That show had been in my mind all my life, popping up in my thoughts sporadically. Eventually, I'd had enough and decided to do some research of my own. I finally managed to uncover the location of the studio where much of that channel's programming had been recorded. Upon further research and eventually traveling on site, I found out that it was now desolate and had been abandoned after the big war had ended. I entered the building with my camera. It was burnt out from the inside. Either a fire had broken out, or someone had wanted to incinerate all of the wooden furniture. After a few hours of cautiously making my way into the studio and snapping pictures, I found an isolated, out-of-the-way room. After having to break through a few old locks and managing to force the heavy door open, I remained frozen in the doorway for several long minutes. Traces of blood and tiny bone fragments lay scattered across the floor. It was a small room and an extremely morbid scene. What truly frightened me, though, what made me turn away and never want to come back to that place, was the bolted, caged microphone hanging from the ceiling in the middle of the room. I framed the photo. It sits in my cubicle in the same spot it has occupied for the last 2 years. It's a reminder for me to work harder, a reminder of all the pain that was caused by moving too slow. 17 kids went missing that summer, snatched from their bedrooms without a trace of who had done it. This case cuts deeper than any I've worked on before. Every day, another parent would come to me and ask, "Why haven't you found my baby yet?" And I would have to say, "I'm trying, I promise." After the 16th disappearance, we received a photo in the mail. There was writing on the back. 2 words. Clock's ticking. If you didn't know any better, you might think the picture was kind of beautiful. It's of an old gravel road that winds delicately up a hill. The picture is taken from the middle of the street, the lens aiming up its path. One side of the road is lined by a patch of bright autumn leaves that look like they've fallen recently. The leaves are matted down slightly, as if by a heavy rain. In the center of the road, there is a small basket. The camera is angled so you can't see inside of it. On either side of the road, there are gigantic pine trees that cast crisscrossing, haunting shadows. Our department was able to find this location, but there was no evidence. No basket in the street. Nothing in the woods. They dismissed as a false lead, but something about the photo got to me. I kept it on my desk for the next year, just trying to figure out what it meant. All I wanted was to be able to tell those parents what had happened to their kids. There was something off about the picture, something that felt really unnatural about it. I thought about it all the time. The basket, the leaves, the pine trees. Then, one day it clicked. Fallen leaves and pine trees. Pine trees don't have leaves. They have needles. Needles don't turn those colors, and they don't fall off in the fall. The pile of leaves wasn't natural. After a year of staring at the picture, a year of telling parents that I couldn't find their children, I finally figured it out. I dug a hole where the leaves were in the photo. There was a basket, buried beneath the dirt. It contained a child's skull. Dental records matched it to Michael Blasters, one of the children who had gone missing. I ordered an excavation of the area. The other kids were buried nearby. Only one complete skeleton was found. It was a child that disappeared only a few days before we got the photo. Unlike the rest, her body was in a small coffin. There was a note pinned to the front of her dress. The same handwriting as the photo. 48 hours of air. You could have saved her. I don't know what it was that made me wake up, but I did. I rolled over and noticed my wife, Kimmy, wasn't in bed with me. I assumed she was in the bathroom or getting water or something of the sort. I kind of half dozed off again a few times, but after a little while, Kimmy still wasn't back. I looked at my phone and noticed it was 3:51 a.m. I got out of bed, threw on a t-shirt and walked out of the bedroom. The bathroom was dark and lifeless. I walked down the rest of the dark hallway and into the dark kitchen. No Kimmy there either. I walked back into the bedroom and found her phone to still be on the bed where she keeps it every night. More confused than worried at this point, I headed back down the hallway and into the family room where the garage connects to, and confirmed that her car was still in fact in the garage. I turned the light on in the family room and ran my hands over my face, wondering where in the world she had gone to. I turned around, and through the sliding glass door that leads to the backyard, I saw movement outside. I turned the lights off to see better, and to my surprise, there she was. Even weirder than being out there in the first place was what she was doing. She was digging. At first glance, I could see 5 holes. I wasn't sure how deep, and she was currently working on the 6th. I stepped outside and called her name, to which I got no response. It was cold outside, very cold, and she was only wearing what she wore to bed, a t-shirt and a pair of short shorts. I called her name again as I slowly walked towards her. She just kept digging as if I wasn't even there. I walked a wide perimeter around her, since I was so unsure of what she was doing. I guess I subconsciously was unsure of what she could do. when I could finally see her face. A chill ran down my already freezing spine. Her eyes were completely rolled back into her skull, to the point I could only see white. She was breathing as heavily as I've ever seen another person breathe, as if she were exhausted beyond the limits of a human being. Even so, she just kept on digging. I took a look at the other holes, and they were each about 1.5 feet wide, maybe 3 feet deep. There wasn't anything in them. It was as if she was just digging to dig. In the time I took to look at the other holes, Kimmy must have finished the one she was working on, because she went back to one of the already finished holes and started to fill it back in. I asked her what she was doing, but of course I received no answer. I just stood there and watched as she filled in each and every last hole with the dirt she had taken out of them. Tried as I might have, she never acknowledged my presence. When she was done, she set the shovel against the house and walked back into the sliding glass door while I followed a safe distance from behind. When she got to the glass door, she turned around and muttered something I didn't quite catch. I asked her what she had said, but she just continued inside, closing the door and locking it behind her. I pounded on the door for her to let me in, but she just walked back towards our bedroom. I ran around the house and used the keypad to the garage to get back inside. I shuffled down the hall to our bedroom to find Kimmy sleeping in our bed, as if she had been there the whole night. I stood there for a short while, trying to wrap my mind around what I had just seen before getting back into bed. I laid there for a while before finally passing back out, and nothing else strange seemed to happen in the interim. When I woke up the next morning, Kimmy wasn't in bed, but I could hear music coming from her phone down in the kitchen. I got up and walked back into the kitchen to find her cooking eggs on the stove. I walked up behind her and gave her a kiss on the cheek. She told me good morning and asked me how I had slept. I told her, probably better than she did, in an intentionally leading tone. She asked what I had meant, and I asked her if she had remembered anything from the night before, which she of course didn't. I took her to the backyard and showed her the freshly filled in holes and explained that around 3 or so the night before, she had in fact dug them. Naturally, she didn't believe me and thought I was just playing a prank on her. It took some convincing, but eventually, she did believe me when I told her it was indeed her who had dug the holes. I explained the entire event to her in detail, and she was visibly shaken by the retelling. She assured me she had never been a sleepwalker before, and that she had no idea why she would have done anything like that. We essentially brushed it off as a very unsettling yet ultimately harmless, spontaneous occurrence of sleepwalking. The rest of our day went by with nothing out of the ordinary happening. We went to bed that night, and I had essentially all but forgotten about the strangeness of the night prior. Even so, my sleep schedule was a bit off. I found myself waking up every hour or so. Once again, I woke up around 3:45 and noticed Kimmy wasn't in bed. I immediately got up and looked out of our bedroom window, and there she was, digging holes again. From what I could tell from as far away as I was, she had 4 done and was working on the 5th. I got up and headed outside. I again tried calling her name as I approached, of course to no avail. Once again, her eyes rolled back into her head. It was like a replay of the previous night that I had gotten to just a little bit earlier this time. Only the holes were in different spots. I finally had enough and didn't want her out in the cold anymore. So, I grabbed the shovel as she sunk it into the ground, stopping her from digging any further. It was then that she let out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. In all honesty, it didn't even sound like it was her screaming. It was high-pitched yet guttural, ear-shattering and sharp. As soon as I let go of the shovel, she stopped, took a few quick, shallow breaths, and then resumed shoveling. I went and put on a sweatshirt and waited outside for her to be done. She again dug 6 holes and then filled them back in, just like the night before. I hopped up and beat her to the door when she set the shovel against the house and began walking back inside. She again stopped and muttered something, but it was too quiet for me to hear. I thought I heard the words, "find you," though. When we got in the hallway, I was so frustrated, worried, confused that I blocked the way for her to walk any further. I pleaded for her to wake up, but I had no success. She just kept trying to walk past me. I finally let her go, and she got back into bed while I followed closely behind. She turned over to face me, and with her eyes closed, she said, "I'm gonna find it before he gets us." I asked her what she meant, but she never answered me. Today went by fine. I explained what had happened last night, but of course she had no idea what I was talking about. We're planning on staying up tonight since it's New Year's and all, and I'm gonna see if it happens again. But to tell you the truth, I really hope it doesn't. I'm a geologist working at Death Valley National Park in Nevada. Over the last few months, we've been studying the geological formation known as the Devil's Hole. I've always found this place to be somewhat disconcerting. We have a vague idea of how it came to be and what makes it do what it does. But there's something else. Something strange. The other day, we sent a little submarine drone into the water to see if we could map out the labyrinth cave system we know is there, but has been completely inaccessible for decades. Also, we wanted to find out how deep it actually goes. The fact an earthquake in China could cause the water to rise so substantially at this spot in Nevada makes us think it goes way deeper than preliminary estimates. The sub started to map the first 50 feet. It was tough to get a great signal. The mineral content in the water was really inhospitable for the systems we use and how they communicate with one another. Not to mention the superheated water near the geothermal vents once you get down there could be enough to disable the drone entirely. At around 75 feet, the signal got really touchy. We'd have a few minutes of decent communication, but then it would cut out completely and leave us wondering if the sub had crashed or had been damaged beyond recovery. During the windows when we could move the drone, we explored from cave to cave and went deeper and deeper. The water was well above boiling. As the pressure increased, so did the temperature. The sub was rated for up to 400 degrees for a short period of time, and pockets of water were getting close to that maximum. We made it to a relatively cool spot, around 225 degrees Fahrenheit, and we were told to stand by. Greg, the guy who was operating the optical equipment on the drone, kept insisting that he was seeing flashes of light, way below our position. I kept insisting that the equipment was malfunctioning, which was causing the flashes of light. But Greg wouldn't shut up about another sensor registering bursts of heat at the same time the flashes would show up. We argued for a little while and the drone stayed in place. The water level in the hole started to rise. This wasn't unexpected. A surprisingly little amount of seismic activity anywhere in the world was enough to move the water over here. We continued our bickering and didn't notice more flashes on the screen until much later, when we were analyzing the video. What finally knocked us out of our respective tantrums, though, was the way the water started to change color. It went from its normal shade to a dull red. Greg glanced at the screen and noticed the depth of the water in the cave chamber, originally at 36 feet, had changed to 353,000 feet. We knew it had to be some sort of sensor error. More flashes showed up on the screen as the water frothed and burbled on the surface. Then the feed went dead. And stayed dead. Greg and I analyzed the video overnight. Everything we had seen was there and was still just as confusing. But then Greg saw a tiny spike in the audio track right when the depth of the cave appeared to drop straight down. He ran it over a few filters to amplify the signal and clean it up. Then he played it back. We listened to it about 20 times in a row, despite hearing it perfectly the first time.
Let me sleep. Let me dream. Soon I will rise.
Corresponding with the massive increase in depth in the last word of the message, there was one more flash in the final video frame before the drone was lost. After Greg cleaned up the video footage, we actually saw what it was. A single, glowing, red eye that appeared to be the size of a house. The size of a house from 353,000 feet above. In my backyard, we have a koi pond. It's been kind of a never-ending project of mine and my wife's. Something we've put a lot of time, effort, and money into the 3 years we lived in our house. A few weeks ago, we decided to extend it some, and I finally got started on what needed to be done to do that last week. I started digging. After about 3 hours, I had dug a good amount of the area I needed to out, and was about 4 feet down in this particular spot when I hit something. Whatever it was metal. I continued digging, looking for an edge of whatever it was, and I found it. I followed the edge around as I kept digging, and it turned out to be a square with a handle on top, and 2 hinges on one side. I pulled up on the handle, but I couldn't get it open. I figured it was a chest or case of some kind, so I dug around the sides of it. But no matter how far I dug, it just kept going. I finally came to the conclusion that it was a hatch of some sort. Perhaps maybe a bomb shelter. When we bought the house, there had been no mention of a bomb shelter here, nor had there ever been mention of it in the history of the house. I dug an area around the hatch so I could more easily get to the top. After a few hours, a night of sleep, and a few more hours the next day of blowtorches, drills, and hammers, I finally got it open. As soon as I pulled the door off, I was hit with a wave of foul odor. The smell was stale and putrid, and was like a mixture of rotten eggs, spoiled milk, and a few dead skunks. After taking a moment to catch my breath, I was finally able to hold it in while I looked inside. There was a ladder that led downwards probably about 20 feet, and I could just barely make out a floor with the sunlight provided. I went to my garage and retrieved a dust mask, hoping it would at least mask the smell somewhat, and also a flashlight. I began my descent down the ladder while my wife stayed up top, curiously observing. The smell only worsened the further down I got, and the mask was doing next to nothing to offset it. I stopped several times on the way down, warding off the urge to vomit. Finally, I think I just got used to it enough to not gag with every breath I took. I made it to the bottom, and there was a small corridor to the left, past which was a large room. Just as I had suspected, it appeared to be a fallout shelter. There were 2 rows of shelving units that once held non-perishable foods, almost all of which were gone. I found a light switch on the wall next to me, which I turned on. To my surprise, 3 rows of fluorescent lights lit up, allowing me to see the entire area. The room was large, likely taking up nearly 2/3 of the square footage under my basement. There was a single twin bed with a nightstand next to it, on which was a handheld radio. I can't imagine it working that far underground. There was a rug on the floor, on top of which was a small desk. On the desk were multiple books, numerous notepads, and various other belongings. In one of the corners of the room was a bucket that was clearly used for relieving oneself. How the contents of the bucket were removed from the hatch, I don't have a clue. There was a makeshift hanging rod attached to one of the walls, on which was a very, very old-looking suit. And resting on top of it was a military helmet. I collected up the loose contents of the shelter, the books, notepads, radio, helmet, etc., and placed them in a box I found near the food racks. One odd thing I noticed is that there were no remnants from the food products that were consumed. This place had obviously been used, as the bed was unkempt and the toilet had been utilized. But there was no area where the trash was kept. I didn't think too much of it. I hadn't yet looked at what the notepads contained, but when I did finally take a look, I was thoroughly creeped out. All they said, for hundreds of pages, were the words, "Please let me out." Nothing else. Just those words written in different sizes over countless pages. Next, I did some research on the helmet. It was a standard issue US Army helmet used during World War II. I don't understand what a US soldier would be doing in a fallout shelter in the Midwest during the Second World War. The next thing I found to be strange was that while most of the books were from the same period the helmet was from, 2 of them were printed in the late 2000s. And the radio was a model that was produced in 1999. Completely baffled, I returned to the shelter. I again descended the ladder. I decided to do a thorough inspection of the place, my hope being to gain any kind of insight as to who had been down there. I looked at the remaining food on the shelves, and all of it seemed to be from the World War II era. I looked for hidden doors but found nothing. The walls were all perfectly solid, without a single flaw to note. I sat down in the chair at the desk and opened up the drawers, but I found nothing. I examined the desk for anything that may have been etched into it, but the wood was next to flawless. It was only when I backed the chair up over the rug and took a step back that I realized the floor beneath me was hollow. I hollered up to my wife that I had found something. I moved the chair to the side and pushed the desk off the rug. Then I slid the rug in the opposite direction of the desk, which revealed a trap door, which was being held shut with a master lock that sat in a divot cut into the metal floor, so as to keep the floor flush. I used a hammer and chisel, and after a short amount of time, I dismantled the padlock. I opened the hatch within the hatch, and fell backwards after getting a glimpse of its contents. Beneath the trapdoor was the source of the smell. It was a decomposing body, one that looked as if it had only been there for a week or two. The area was just big enough to fit this man, who was positioned in a way I didn't presume possible for a human. The only way I can describe it is folded up. I immediately called up to my wife and told her to call 911 and got out of the hatch. The man was wearing clothing from the World War II era. In his pocket was a military ID showing that he was born in 1921. Another pocket contained a Motorola Razr cell phone from 2007. His sidearm was a pistol that was produced in 1979. I found out later that the name on the military ID wasn't registered in any of the armed forces databases, and his social security number wasn't one that was distributed by the United States. Nobody by his name was ever reported missing in the history of the country. It was determined by investigators that the ground above the hatch door had remained untouched for decades, and it was confirmed that the door was in fact the only means of entering and exiting the shelter. The questions are obvious. Who was this man? How did he have technology from the future? How long was he in the shelter for? When did he die? Where did all the human waste and garbage go? How was he only a week or two decomposed? The strangest question to me, however, is who locked him under that trap door and moved the rug and desk back over it? So, over the last few months, I've been working for someone I responded to on Craigslist. I was scouring the internet for some sort of paying gig. I really didn't care what. Then I came across a post on Craigslist. I had just refreshed the page and there it was. Someone was looking for a person to come by and feed their pets. I assumed they were just going out of town or something. So, I contacted them and left my number through the email. I got a response immediately in the form of a phone call. The caller was a man who explained to me that he was moving out of town and his parents had cats they wanted fed daily. I gave the man my name so he could run me through a cursory background check, and in 20 minutes, I was hired. I went there the next morning to get all of the instructions and whatnot, and met the man I had spoken to on the phone. His name was Ben. Ben explained to me that he would no longer be able to care for his parents' cats, and that his parents needed to focus on themselves, whatever that meant. So I was being brought in to take care of that. The money would be left on the kitchen table at the end of every week. $200 a week, just to feed some cats. I know, right? In addition to that, money for more cat food would be left for me as needed. Then he told me the first thing I thought was strange. I was to arrive at exactly 10 a.m. every day, and to be gone by 10:10 a.m. And I was never, under any circumstances, to interact with his parents. He told me that when I'm in their home, they would be in their chairs in the living room watching television, and that I was not to disturb them. Ever. He asked if any of that would be a problem, to which I assured him it wouldn't. He then showed me the area in which the cats eat. There were 4 cats in total, and where the food was kept. While he wasn't rude in the least, he was very adamant that I not explore further in the house, to which I assured him that wouldn't be a problem. He then ushered me outside and showed me where the spare key was in case the door was ever locked. But he told me that was very unlikely to happen. And with that, he expressed his hopes that I could be trusted one last time, shook my hand, and told me to be there at 10 a.m. every day starting tomorrow. If I was ever unable to make it, call and leave a message on their home phone, to which he gave me the number. I shook my head and was on my way. The next day came, and I went inside exactly at 10 a.m. I walked into the house, and immediately to my right were Ben's parents, sitting in recliners, facing away from me, watching some kind of game show. I announced my presence, which they ignored, and I made my way into the kitchen. I then filled the cat bowls and left. This exact same scenario played out countless times over the next few months. 10 a.m., unreturned hello, feed the cats, leave. On Fridays, I would pick up the small stack of $20 bills from the kitchen table. It was the easiest job I ever had. Then came the inevitable. One day, I was running late. I got to the house at 10:08. I entered and apologized to Ben's parents for being late, to which I once again got no response. They just kept sitting in their chairs watching their game show. I went to the kitchen and fed the cats. I looked at my phone, which read 10:11, and walked down the hall towards the front door. When I reached the living room, I jumped and gasped out of shock. Ben's parents were now standing in the dark, behind their chairs, completely motionless, and staring directly at me. I apologized for running late and got out of there. Though unnerved, I went back the next day on time, and everything was fine. A few more weeks went by with nothing strange happening. And then came the last day I was there. I got there at 10:03, but I wasn't worried because I knew I could be out before 10:10. The problem came when I was in the kitchen, and I heard someone whisper the words, "Help me." It startled me and I jumped back, looking around for the source of the cry for help. I saw no one around, but I heard it again. and then a third time. I began searching some more before realizing I was running behind. I looked down at my phone and it was 10:10. My heart sank to my stomach when I looked down the hallway and saw Ben's parents for the first time in the light. They were grossly emaciated and pale, looking utterly malnourished. They were essentially walking skeletons. I apologized for taking so long and said I would be on my way, but they just stood there, blocking the path to the front door. I said I would take the back door, which was located in the kitchen, but when I went in to open it, it required a key to open from the inside. Seriously. It was at this point that true panic set in. I looked behind me, and the parents were now about a half a foot away from the entrance to the kitchen, and I had nowhere else to go, except what I presumed was a door to the pantry. They had blank stares across their faces, and their eyes looked as if the life had left them long ago. In a last-ditch effort, I went to the door that I thought was the pantry, and found it containing a staircase leading into the basement, with, of course, no light. As soon as I opened the door, there was a horrid stench that washed over the otherwise clean air I was standing in. I carefully went down the stairs and looked for a window, but they were all nailed shut. I happened to look back up the stairs, and the parents were now standing next to each other at the top. It was absolutely horrifying. I pulled out my phone and called 911, not knowing what else to do. And when I explained my situation, they said they would send a car out immediately, and to stay on the phone while they connected me to the unit en route. I ran into the dark basement, using my phone as a light. It didn't provide too much illumination since I was in the middle of a call, but it was just enough. There were racks of junk that lined the basement, separating it into almost aisles. I began checking if any of the windows were possibly loose, like I'd be that lucky. Then, I turned around and shined the light in front of me, and I was inches away from the parents' lifeless-looking faces. I let out a scream and ran in the other direction, and tripped over something, sending my phone flying from my hand. Of course, it landed face down so I couldn't find it. I scrambled to my feet and ran back up the stairs and into the kitchen, looking back and seeing the parents standing at the bottom of the stairs, with slight grins on their faces. I ran down the hall to the front door and flung it open, screaming when I saw the cop standing right in front of me. He asked me if I was the one that called as I pushed past him to get outside, and told him that I was. I then looked in the window over my shoulder and saw the parents sitting in their chairs, watching their game show. I explained to the officer that these crazy people had trapped me in their house and were chasing me around. The cop went in to talk to the parents and look around while I sat in the cop car. He came back out about 5 minutes later and asked if I was sure someone was chasing me, to which I said, yeah, I was absolutely sure that it was the two old people that lived in there. He then informed me that the people that lived there, the people in the chairs, have been dead for quite some time. I was shocked. I then asked him what the smell in the basement was, to which he replied there was another body down there. Then the officer's backup arrived. I gave them my statement and explained how I had been coming there every day for months to feed the cats. I told them to call Ben, the homeowner's son. I gave them the number and it was disconnected. After giving my statement, they cut me loose and I went home. A few days later, I received a call from one of the police officers and told me that the body in the basement was Ben. I have countless questions, but the one that bothers me the most, the one I don't get, is who has been paying me to feed the cats this whole time. Please, help me out. Please, I begged.
Shut up.
Please, I am begging you. You'll do it, right? Just a small tear in the suit. Or maybe you could crack the helmet a little. No one needs to know.
I said, shut up,
Shouted the guard, and slammed the baton into my chest. Even though the suit absorbed most of the impact, I still doubled over and gagged. None of the 89 other prisoners reacted. Why would they? I was the only one with a suit.
Everything all right, Carl?
Inquired the second guard, who had just entered the chamber.
Yeah, it's all right,
Replied the guard next to me.
Asshole is just panicking, that's all.
The second guard sneered.
He wasn't panicking too much when those 37 people were begging him for their lives. Double check his suit. Check the nutrients tube and the air supply. And make sure his hands are tightly wrapped.
Carl grabbed my hair and lifted my head up. He meticulously checked every inch of my suit and made sure my hands were bound behind my back. He smiled at me as he tightened the helmet over my head. Suddenly, the red light bulb near the door started blinking. Carl and the other guard hurried as they made sure the other prisoners were tied correctly in their respective seats. I began shouting again. Take it off! Remove the suit! Please, remove it! The other guard quickly left, while Carl stopped at the exit of the chamber and read the sentence once again.
89 sentenced to death.
No! No, please, take it off! Remove the suit!
And 1 yearer.
And as he shut and locked the door, the light stopped blinking and stayed on. And then, within a blink of an eye, all 90 of us were ejected out into space. It took less than a minute for the others to freeze. I know it because one of them floated quite near to me and I saw his face. I tried to move my hands, but I couldn't. Carl had done his job well. The spaceship wasn't visible anymore, and the corpses were floating away, slowly getting covered by the endless blackness of space. I looked around for signs of moving objects. Something. Anything. Anything which could hit me with enough impact to kill me. I already knew this portion of space was specifically chosen because of its emptiness. Nothing passes through here. I shivered as I looked at the small display screen attached to my left thigh. The display only had one thing on it. 365. I used to work at McDonald's in the middle of nowhere just outside of Port Richmond, Virginia. I know what you're thinking. Spooky, right? But a few months ago, something terrible happened to one of the staff that for some reason justified erasing the place off of the map. Not to say I was sad to see the place go. Now, the thing about fast food is that it attracts two kinds of workers. Poor but intelligent people who are working towards a bigger picture, and total losers who have given up all hope. I belong to the latter group, but Grace, man, she was the queen of the former. When we both started working together about 8 months ago, I knew straight away that this girl was so far out of my league. She was so cool and down to earth and gorgeous. She had this way of just accepting people and finding a way to admire them, no matter the person. It didn't matter that she was beautiful, educated, and better than me in every way. When you are the standard suburban mom set their kids not to be, you don't come across that kind of acceptance every day, you know? After months of working together, yeah, we got pretty close. Not what you're thinking. So it must have been around mid-June, and we had both been working the drive-thru together for a couple of weeks. When you spend a large portion of your life serving ungrateful people from a tiny window, you get real familiar with the view. From my little box, you could see the grassy hill that separated the drive-thru from the road. Said road and beyond was a Walmart parking lot. I spent so much time staring out of that window, I even started to recognize the cars that drove by. But, after my first few weeks, there was one in particular that I started to look out for. I thought it must have been the ex-con jitters or growing up where I did, but I started to get a real bad feeling about this truck as days went by. It was an old Ford truck, one of the 87 F-150 models. Once upon a time, it would have been a real beaut, all bright reds with a white stripe down the middle. Now, the red body of the truck was rusted beyond recognition, and the white stripe was a sickly yellow, almost like rotting teeth. The windows of the truck were the only things that survived the past 20 years unscathed, as they clearly weren't stock. The whole truck was so heavily tinted I couldn't understand how the thing was still on the road. The police are real eager around here. Or maybe that's just been my experience. Anyway, the first time I saw the truck, it was parked in the lot across the road opposite to me. Nothing unusual about that. Other than the creepy child abduction look, it was just another car in the lot. Or so I thought. The next day from my booth overlooking the drive-thru, I saw the car again. And again. And again. I saw it maybe 30 or 40 times that day. I think it was just driving in circles for some reason. Suffice to say, at this point, I was starting to get really suspicious of this truck. It was looking quiet that night, but the manager was always on my case if I ever left my post. So I gave Grace a quick text and asked her to watch the window while I used the bathroom. When I came back, I asked her about the truck, and she got real quiet. Said that a few minutes after I left, she saw the truck come down the road and then slam on the brakes for no apparent reason. She said it stayed there just doing nothing in an empty road. That it felt like whoever was in there was staring at her. I guess it freaked her out when I told her that I had seen it around as well, because she went back to work, then went home before her shift had finished. It was the first time I had seen her anything less than offensively happy. The next day, Grace didn't show up, so I covered her drive-thru shift. There was a big line that evening, so instead of looking out for the truck, I was really focused on working through the white trash piling up along the drive-thru. So focused, in fact, that I didn't even notice the truck when it came to the window. No one had taken any orders from the driver, so as far as I could tell, it had just driven up out of nowhere. The truck stopped at my window, and when I finally noticed, I couldn't even breathe. My eyes were locked on the tar-black window, straining for a sight of the driver, but I couldn't see anything. I just got this feeling like I'm staring down the barrel of crude oil, and there was something in there staring back at me. I didn't know what else to do, so I was just having a staring contest with this window. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the truck raced off, tires screeching as it plowed over the grass across the wrong lane and raced off into the night. I tried to tell the manager, but of course he just told me to get a grip and deal with my stuff. What a dick. The next day, Grace came back to work and she seemed back to her old self. I was still kind of shaken up from last night, and when I told her what had happened, we were both pretty spooked. After a quick smoke break, we both agreed that it was just probably some creep playing a joke on us, but we'd both keep an eye just in case. I saw it only briefly that night. It was driving real slow down the road beyond the hill. Its lights were off, so I could only see the truck by the lights of the car behind. Behind it, the traffic was building up and you could hear horns blaring, followed by curses that were cut short as people got close enough to see the windows. Before long, the truck raced off again, apparently done for the evening. When time came for my regular bathroom break, Grace was happy enough to take my spot at the window again. That was the last time I saw her. I must have been gone 2 minutes at the most, but by the time I had returned to the window, Grace was gone, and the sound of screeching tires pierced the night. I ran into the back and called the police, told the manager what I had thought happened, and pushed my way into the office to look at the security tapes. The manager was busy hollering regulations beyond the door, but I didn't really care. As I turned on the computer and set up the tape, I saw what had happened. The cameras had picked up everything. On the screen, it played out like a bad horror movie. The truck had rolled up out of nowhere as soon as I had gone. And with the lights off, Grace had seen it too late. She tried her best to get out of the way. But before she could, something came bursting out from inside the truck. 2 long, thin, black arms that seemed more like dead branches than limbs thrust from the darkness where the driver's window should be, and they wrapped themselves around Grace's mouth and torso. To reach that far, they must have been around 6 feet long at least. It was over in about 2 seconds. Grace was pulled headfirst from the drive-thru window, and that was that. The police closed the restaurant after they took my statement. All of us, management included, got let go so fast they actually had to pay us unemployment. We've been looking for her ever since. It's been 6 months now, and it turns out Grace's family are incredibly awesome people. One of her uncles has even taken me on as an apprentice mechanic. It turned out that one of my friend's dads was a police officer who was in fact working the case. The guy absolutely hates me, but my friend finally managed to get some information out of him. Today, after we met up and spoke about it, I'm convinced that whatever happened in that booth was even more sinister than I could ever imagine. The police haven't turned up anything. Turns out the plate number I gave them for the truck actually belongs to a car on the other side of the country. They never even managed to see the damn thing on any other cameras around the area, and they've checked them all. It's like the truck picked her up, blasted out of the drive-thru, and vanished into the night. Well, there was one tape they didn't get to look at more than briefly. According to my friend, his dad told him his whole department is up in arms because of a couple of suits that came in and confiscated the original tape maybe 2 days after the kidnapping. Told the whole police force to drop the case and just leave it to the feds. No one believes me. Not even Grace's family. Even the cops that saw the tape are keeping it real quiet for some reason. But I'm not crazy. I saw that window, and I know that whatever took Grace from the booth that day wasn't anything natural. These days, I'm always looking at the road. And even when I'm working in the garage, I keep an eye out on the horizon, waiting for the truck with the tar black windows. On October 16, 2009, a boy by the name of Finn Carlton walked into the band room of my high school and closed the door behind him. He pulled a pistol from his coat pocket and fired 6 shots. Then he tied his belt around a pipe on the ceiling and hung himself. 6 shots, 7 bodies. That's what the authorities found when they entered the room. Finn's victims were apparently made to kneel in a straight line before they were executed, and their half-eaten lunches had been spoiled by the carnage. 6 rounds, 6 heads, 1 bullet each. Chloe Cannon, 15 years old, loved the color blue, played the French horn, cute in a mousy sort of way. Murdered. Xavier Mayweather, 15 years old, on the track team, always rode his bike to school. Murdered. Ronald R.J. Saldez, 16 years old, had a notebook he sketched in. Already bought his tickets to the midnight premiere of the new Harry Potter movie. Murdered. Zach Trainer, 15 years old, 280 pounds, played the tuba. Refused several times to join the football team. Murdered. Marianne Ortega, 15 years old, barely spoke English. She liked horror films. Murdered. Christopher Carlton, 16 years old. Also played the French horn. Secretly dating Chloe Cannon. Murdered. By his older brother, no less. I didn't know any of these students in life, but I know them all too well in death. And I hate each one of them with my whole heart. This all went down during my junior year. Our school was closed for a few days, but it's amazing how quickly business as usual returns. A grief assembly, a memorial plaque in the band room, and bam, it's like everyone's forgotten. Everyone's moved on. Everyone. Except for me. Myself, I never experienced the grief. I didn't know any of these kids. And while I felt for my peers who were close to them, my life wasn't really affected by their gruesome ends. Sure, there was the existential shock, the life is fleeting realization. But I'd already lost a sibling in a freak accident years before. I was no stranger to death. That's why, in the weeks following the tragedy, I didn't have any trouble sleeping. So there I was, a month after the shooting, on a school night, not having any trouble sleeping. I had forgotten to silence my phone, so when I got a text, it buzzed on the wooden nightstand near my bed. Groggily, I rolled over to check it, and was instantly jerked awake by what I read. I'm going to kill her. Both of them. Sure, why not? Jesus, I muttered, eyes fixed on the macabre message. A threatening collection of black pixels backed by a heartless electric glow. I found a morbid fascination then, as I do now, in letters, meaningless squiggles by themselves which can combine to strike more terror than the steepest cliff, or the most menacing beast. The combination of these particular squiggles drilled a strangely familiar fear into my heart. I glanced to see what number the message had come from, but the field was blank. It appeared as though the text had not been sent by anything at all. Frantically, I hit reply. What? Who is this? I waited for a few minutes, but received no response. Unsettled, I got out of bed. I wanted to do something, I just didn't know what. Finally, after staring around my room for a moment, I decided I'd splash my face with some water. I went to the bathroom and looked myself in the mirror. A good, long, hard look. Staring myself down, willing myself to get a grip. Finally, I splashed my face with some icy water from the sink. I patted my face dry with a hand towel and went back to my room. My phone's LED was blinking from the nightstand. I had received another text. I shut the door and took a step towards my bed, wondering somewhat anxiously if the new message was a reply from whoever had sent the previous one. But I had barely moved before I stopped dead in my tracks. I wasn't alone. There, hovering in front of my nightstand, faintly luminescent and barely visible, was a girl. A tiny, mousy-looking girl. A girl who was strangely pretty in a non-obvious way. A girl who would never celebrate her sweet 16, or stretch her undersized legs to reach the pedals of a car. A girl who was dead. Chloe Cannon wore a thin blue nightgown that reached to her knees. Her feet did not touch my floor. She bobbed slightly, up and down in the air, seemingly staring not at me but at a point on the wall directly behind me. She appeared both solid and not. Her skin had a distinct silver pallor, yet I could see the light on my phone blinking through her torso. Her face looked vaguely sad. I could not move. I could not speak. We remained still together for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I convinced myself that I was imagining things. I took a step towards her. Then another. Another. But not another. I could not bring myself to step closer, because as I neared her, her face began to change. Her left cheekbone began to sag. Her skull began to dent. Her eyeball began to rotate and protrude from its socket. A dark spot began to appear amid her fine, silvery hair. I backed away in horror, and the bullet's fatal blow faded from sight as quickly and as seamlessly as it had appeared. In desperate panic, I flicked the light switch up, and she was gone. I heaved a sigh of relief. I had been seeing things. I thought perhaps the shooting had affected me more than I'd let myself believe. Still, my knees wobbled. I could barely even stand. Bracing myself against the wall with my arm, I stared at the blinking notification light on my phone. Eventually, my curiosity over who had sent that morbid message was too great. I turned off the light. No hovering girl, that was good. And scrambled into my bed. Safely under my covers, I grabbed my phone and opened the second text. This time, I found no morbid fascination in the squiggles before me. These 5 letters, and 2 punctuation marks, backed by a harsh glow in the comfortless dark, carried with them only dread. Chloe. I didn't know Finn Carlton. To this day, when people hear what high school I went to, they usually ask me if I was acquainted with the scrawny kid who murdered his brother, and 5 others before stringing himself up in the pipes. They ask it with a sort of reality show fascination. And it feels like they're only asking so they can later tell their equally fascinated friends that they knew a guy who knew the guy. And their face always falls a bit when I say no. No, I didn't. I'd never seen him before. Of course, that's not entirely true. Finn actually didn't live too far from me, and we both walked home from school most days. I was a year younger than him, and we truly didn't know one another in the least. Not a word was ever exchanged between us. Still, I knew who he was. I stared at his backpack some days on my way home. Black with bright green trim. The green was my favorite shade. I have to admit, it was a pretty cool backpack. I suppose part of the reason I tell people I don't know Finn is that it's simpler than going into detail about how I really didn't know him, but I knew of him. And sometimes stared at his backpack when I walked home from school. But there's another reason, too. And I'm reminded of it every time his victims come to me. When I'm scared and cold and in lonely moments. I'm ashamed. I checked myself into a loony bin. Oh, pardon me, a psychiatric hospital. The year after I graduated. That's how bad things had gotten. I'd never seen Chloe again, but I had seen all the others. By this point, Xavier and Zach chilled in my room practically every night. They never hurt me, but if I got too close, their faces would fall out of place, and their death wounds would emerge. If I'm being perfectly honest, they didn't scare me that much. They didn't seem to bear me any ill will. Apart from that bizarre message the night I saw Chloe, they seemed content to merely hang about. And their presence had become almost comforting. If they were real, I figured I could handle that. No. What truly frightened me was the idea that they might not be real. That I might in fact be out of my fucking mind. All I wanted was to live a normal life. Xavier, Zach, and the others weren't getting in the way of that. But a mental illness certainly would. I thought it would be an easy process. Hey doc, I'm going nuts. Can you lock me up for a while and hit me with some meds? But it's not that simple. As it turns out, there's a lot involved in admitting oneself into the farm. Not the least of which is a series of probing interviews with psychiatric professionals. I know they mean well, but in my experience, chats with these quacks usually do more harm than good. They drag up stuff that your mind hides. And sometimes your mind hides that stuff for a reason. I must have met a dozen people who went in for a 5-minute checkup and came out remembering how their uncle used to touch them when they were kids. For me, it didn't happen quite that way. I was in my 3rd and final interview. This one with the head of the institution herself, when I finally remembered. It wasn't gradual. It came all at once. I broke down sobbing, realizing what I had done, what responsibility I bore. It's a surreal experience. To forget. Not just to have something slip your mind, like where you put your keys, but to really, truly forget. I wish I had forgotten forever. Seeming a bit taken aback by my outburst, the hospital administrator signed a piece of paper and tried to hand it to me, telling me it would account for at least a 90-day stay. But I barely heard her. I wiped the snot from my nose, blinking back tears and staring behind her in horror. Where Chloe Cannon hovered above, the strange, sad look still etched on her face. It was the first time I had seen her since that night, long ago in my room. I pointed behind the lady, shrieking, "She's there, look!" Now thoroughly alarmed, the administrator whipped her head around and then, apparently seeing nobody, pressed a button on her desk. The paper she had been trying to hand over fluttered to the ground. I wrenched my gaze from Chloe to look at the paper, face up on the concrete floor. And as they dragged me from the room, I saw a message written in the unmistakable handwriting of a teenage girl, where the administrator had signed. With my dad's gun, I guess. Of course I know where he keeps it. Chloe's face, twisted in a cruel smirk, was the last thing I saw before it all went black. October 15th, 2009. Chloe Cannon and her friends had less than 24 hours to live. Of course, they didn't know that then. Nobody did. It was just a regular day in our regular town. School had been out for a half an hour, and I was already on my way home. And who was right in front of me? You guessed it, boys and girls. Finn Carlton. I walked a few dozen paces behind him, my feet crunching on the leaves on the sidewalk. My breath barely visible in the brisk autumn air. I stared at the green trim on his black backpack. God, it was such a cool backpack. His head hung low, and his shoulders were slumped forward. That was odd. I mean, the kid never had great posture, but on this day, he looked like his books weighed 100 pounds. He was sniffling a lot, too. I can't be sure, but I think he was crying. I didn't care much about that, though. Finn Carlton's problems were none of my concern. At least, that's what I thought at the time. No, most of my thoughts were on my mother. She didn't have work that day, and that usually meant she had a damn fine meal waiting for the family at home. And I know you think all your mothers can cook a damn fine meal, but trust me, they wouldn't even compare. Anyway, Finn had barely even crossed my mind until he reached into his pocket. He pulled out a ringing cell phone and answered it. "What do you want?" His voice seemed thick, like a guy trying to sound more masculine than he felt. At first, my ears barely even registered the first half of the conversation. "No, I can't. I can't ask her. Because, man, I think you already know. Dude, she's with Chris. Yes, my brother Chris. What other Chris would I be talking about?" My ears perked up a bit. Juicy drama. Just what I needed to take the boredom out of this brutally dull walk. I quickened my stride somewhat, hoping to get a bit closer and catch more of the conversation. I took care to avoid the leaves on the sidewalk, not wanting to draw Finn's attention to my presence. He continued. "No, I'm not guessing. I saw them kiss. I don't know, next to the band room. Are you high? Of course it was her." "Yeah, you're telling me. I feel like shit. I'm losing my mind over here." I didn't know who the girl he mentioned was, but I did know of his brother Chris. He was a year younger than I, and it always struck me as strange that he and Finn were related. While Finn was quiet, scrawny, and a bit morose seeming, Chris was a handsome, upbeat kid who gave off the impression that he was going places in life. "Oh yeah, dude, that was the last straw," Finn continued, his voice shaking with rage. "You have no idea how done I am with this shit." Then he went silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke again. His voice sounded different. Lower. Meaner. "I'm going to kill her. Both of them. Sure. Why not?" My blood instantly turned to ice. I stopped dead in my tracks. Did he just say what I think he just said? Finn laughed a little bit, A harsh yet excited laugh, then spoke again. With my dad's gun, I guess. Of course I know where he keeps it. My mind was reeling at this point. I stood alone on the sidewalk, my breath short and my heartbeat quick. I tried to force what I had just heard from my mind. Surely he couldn't be serious. But God, he sounded like he was. He sounded deadly serious. I don't think I've ever heard that tone of voice from anyone in my life. Finn had continued walking and was almost out of earshot. He stepped further and further away, and I had no interest in hearing any more of this conversation. I felt sick to my stomach. I was only close enough to hear one final sentence before he trailed off. I don't know, man. Tomorrow's as good a day as any. It happened the next day, at lunch. I was in the cafeteria, sitting at the usual table with the usual people, when a pop, muffled but clearly audible, rang through the air. A few seconds later, then another, and another. By the fourth pop, the cafeteria was silent. By the sixth, pandemonium had ensued. Students trampled over one another in their flight to the west exit, away from that sound. Teachers tried unsuccessfully to give the mob order. Everyone, myself included, was just getting the hell out of there. As I ran with the crowd, my thoughts were with Finn Carlton, who was presently undoing his belt and staring at a pipe on the ceiling of the locked band room. Those pops rang out in my head, grisly echoes playing over and over and over, growing louder and louder and louder. This is your fault, is all I could think. This is your fault. The final knock on my cell door awoke me. Perhaps cell is too harsh a word. It was a nice room. They took good care of me. Still, when I climbed out of bed and saw those beautiful words on my calendar, day 90, I dressed with a little pep in my step. I could have left at any time, of course, but the paperwork would have been so complicated. That, and I couldn't think of anything better to do on the outside. So I stayed for 3 long months, talking to therapists, swallowing pills, and sharing my feelings in hilarious group circles with other inmates who were actually crazy. And that's the thing. The one thing I learned from my time in the funny farm. They were crazy, and I wasn't. No, Chloe Cannon was real, in life and in death. As real as my fingers flying over my keyboard right now, telling you my story. Her secret boyfriend, Christopher Carlton. He's real too. So is Xavier Mayweather, and Marianne Ortega, and RJ Saldez, and every last pound of Big Zach Trainer. They're all real, realer to me than they ever were alive, even though they're all lying in the frozen December ground with traces of lead still in their heads. They're all real, and they won't leave me alone. And why should they? I'm the reason RJ never got to use those Harry Potter tickets. The newspapers reported tirelessly on the victims after the shooting. And one of the details they really harped on was that RJ was a huge Harry Potter fan, and that he had just bought tickets for the upcoming midnight premiere months in advance. I think J.K. Rowling even sent some nice stuff to his family. I didn't catch the movie in theaters, but I got it on Redbox a few months later. I wish I could say I was alone when I watched it, but RJ didn't miss a single frame. I'm the reason that the kiss shared between Chloe Cannon and Chris Carlton, the kiss they meant to hide but was seen by a jealous brother anyway, was their last. I'm the reason Xavier never broke 5 minutes in the mile. I'm the reason Marianne never learned better English. And I'm the reason Zach never lost all the weight he had meant to. I'm the reason they're all dead. I received Chloe's final message in an email 2 years ago. It said, "Tomorrow's as good a day as any. Chloe." Though I see her every night, she hasn't spoken to me since. There's so much she could say, but I'm thinking she's choosing, somehow, some way, to let it remain unsaid. Isn't it better if I fill in the gaps? What's it like to still be alive? How can you live with yourself? You could have saved us. She never says it though. None of them ever do. I don't even know if they can say it. But as they crowd around my bed every night, all 6 of them, I can feel it in their stares. They all want to be alive, and they'll haunt me as long as I draw the breath they crave. I'm not crazy. I'm not hallucinating. I'm not a freak. I'm simply and overwhelmingly consumed by guilt. I have a gun that I keep in the corner of my closet. A gun not unlike the one Finn Carlton stole from his dad's dresser, in a box that you could only find if you're looking for it. I look for it sometimes. I take it out sometimes too. And every once in a while I put a bullet in it, close the chamber, and hold it to my temple with a trembling, sweaty palm. Every time I do, I feel my 6 friends, my 6 tormentors cheering me on. But I've never pulled the trigger. Not yet. I guess the times just never seemed right, but perhaps there's no sense in putting it off any longer. From where I sit now, I can see the box. Just the corner, peeking out from the top of the closet. Taunting me. Daring me. When will I give in? I don't know, man. Tomorrow's as good a day as any, right? I work as a valet at a casino in Atlantic City. It's not the most glamorous job, but it pays well and it's fun. Who wouldn't want a taste of what it's like to drive a sweet-ass sports car they could never afford? Usually, my nights are pretty uneventful. I park the cars, walk back to the valet station, wait, walk back to the parking lot, and drive the cars back to their owners waiting at the entrance. If I'm lucky, my patron will reward me with a good tip. If my patron was unlucky, I'll get a scoff and the stink eye, as if it's somehow my fault they came out of the casino several $1,000s poorer. Worst is, I'm pretty sure it's more a question of bruised egos. The types that come into my casino consider a couple $1,000s to be pocket change. This isn't the place for down-on-their-luck alcoholic husbands looking to gamble their paychecks away. This is a place of expensive cars, flashy watches, fancy suits, old money, and men who think they own the world. And probably do. I never let any of that bother me. I've always just done my job and lived by the valet's cardinal rule. If we see something, we say nothing. Whether it be a sack of cocaine or evidence of a backseat orgy, we keep our mouths shut. Our job isn't to police or judge. It's simply to get the cars from point A to point B, which is literally just around the corner, but apparently too far for the rich folks to walk. Just like shrinks have doctor-patient confidentiality, we offer valet car confidentiality. The other night, I had to break that unofficial confidentiality agreement. And here's why. His name was Edward Smith, and yes, he looked just as pretentious as his name suggested. He showed up late at night with the shit-eating grin of a man who shops for wives based on bra sizes and waistlines. He had a small, busty woman on his arm who sported a massive diamond ring on her finger that blurred the lines between expensive and tacky, and who wore a leopard print dress so tight it might as well have been a skin suit. She looked 20 years younger, but every bit as entitled. Edward, on the other hand, had applied so much gel his hair looked like plastic. He had gone all out with diamond-studded cufflinks, and he wore a suit so perfectly tailored, it had probably been sewn directly onto him. Without a single glance in my direction, Mr. Smith tossed me his valet key and said, "Don't scratch her." Entitled asshole or not, he was a client, and I was going to be careful with his car. I always was. I opened the door and immediately caught a whiff of something strong. It was like a plume of lavender perfume had crashed over me like a tidal wave. I could taste it as it burned my nose and made my eyes water. It was so strong I had to open all the windows and hold my breath just to survive the short drive to the lot around the corner. I was distracted. I could barely see. Hell, I could even hear ringing in my ears as though I were sucking on a lemon. Just as the car came to a stop in its parking spot, I heard a thud coming from the back. Not a light thud either. A nice, strong thud that made the car bump. Shit, I cursed under my breath. I must have hit something. Something big. Something I hadn't seen through the veil of tears my eyes had been producing to wash out the perfume. I could just imagine roadkill crushed under the wheel, blood sprayed over the pristine gold paint job, and maybe even a nasty dent. It wasn't going to come out of my paycheck. The casino had insurance. But I was as good as fired. I resisted the urge to bash my head against the steering wheel out of frustration. I couldn't risk causing more damage, and lingered in the driver's seat as I tried to figure out how I was going to explain this to my boss. People don't hit animals in parking lots, driving at 5 miles per hour, with enough floodlights to light up a football stadium. That's just not something that happens. Another thud sent the car bouncing again. And this time, I was more scared than surprised because the thud followed by a very light, barely audible whimper. Oh shit, I whispered to myself. It was alive. I didn't know what to do. Back up, stay put, drive over the cement strip and onto the grass? Was I going to have to put the poor creature out of its misery? As another bump rocked the car, I started to worry about how big it must have been to be able to shake the car in its injured state. Was it even safe to go outside? What if it was a coyote? What if it reared its head and bit me? A peek. I needed to sneak a peek of it, to know what it was before I proceeded. I opened the door and shuffled onto my stomach, careful not to scuff the leather interior. Edward would notice if I scuffed anything, and I'd be in twice as much trouble. Patrons always notice every little defect. They didn't notice when we took the liberty of throwing away used condoms or cigarettes forgotten on the driver's seat. But they definitely noticed if we so much as left a piece of lint behind. Once I was in position, I took a deep breath, braced myself to see some poor, eviscerated animal, and craned my neck down to look under the car. There was nothing there. Just 4 wheels on the pavement. No blood, no guts. No animal crawling away with half its body dragging behind it like some zombie. What the hell? I raced out of the car and bent down on all fours, scanning the wheels more thoroughly. I pushed myself to my feet and circled around the car. My attention split between trying to find the animal I had hit and checking for damage. The car looked as sparkly and as shiny as the day it had left the dealership, and there wasn't so much as a tuft of fur left behind. As I stood there, by the back right wheel, the car suddenly bounced, and I heard another whimper. The trunk, I realized. Somebody's in the trunk. I felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved I hadn't almost killed something. And on the other hand, the situation was suddenly much, much worse. See something. Say nothing. That was our cardinal rule. No matter what kind of shit we saw in those cars, we were not allowed to do anything. It wasn't our place. It wasn't my place. If I tried to help, they'd have my job, but... Nervously, I said, "Is anyone in there?" I heard what sounded like sobs as the car shook in response. I was right. "Just hang on. I'll get you out of there." I ran around front and pulled the key from the ignition, then circled back to the trunk. I put the key in, turned right, turned left, turned right again. But the key didn't work. Of course it didn't work. That was the whole point of a valet key. Keeping the valet out of your stuff. Shit. I paced around back and forth, wondering what to do. That's when the thought occurred to me. Maybe Edward kept a spare key. I headed back inside the car and started searching the glove compartment and dashboard, hoping I'd find one. I found everything from a gold flask to a custom mahogany business card holder. But no key. Meanwhile, the car continued to bounce every so often, and the whimpers persisted. I sat on the curb, biting my nails as I pondered what to do. Risk my job by snitching to the cops, or simply just let it go. It wasn't too late. I could save my own neck. I could bury my head in the sand and convince myself this was some sort of fetish thing, and the person was totally into it. I could pretend nothing happened. But then again, how could I live with myself if I did that? So I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. The wait was unbearable. I spent my time trying to calm whoever was inside the trunk. I gave them my name and made one-sided small talk, even as the thuds grew weaker and the whimpers came to a stop. Finally, I saw the red and blue lights of a squad car turning into the parking lot. I flagged them down, but by then, the trunk had gone silent. They said something about just cause or probable cause or something they say all the time in those cop shows. Point being, they couldn't open the trunk just yet. They had the casino security track down Edward Smith, who showed up looking as sheepishly self-satisfied as he had earlier. This time with 3 women on his arm instead of just one.
"What can I do for you, gentlemen?"
he asked the policeman calmly. I could just barely hear the conversation from behind the squad car where I was giving my statement. The cops explained they suspected someone was being held against their will, and the slimy guy just smiled and shrugged.
"I have no idea where someone might have gotten that idea,"
he said.
"Would you please open the trunk, sir?"
asked the officer. He smirked broadly, releasing the women in his arms. He shooed them away with a playful slap on the ass, then said,
"Why, of course, officer. You only need to ask."
He reached into his jacket and pulled out his car key, not hesitating for a second to unlock the trunk and open it. I stretched my neck as far as it could go to see who was inside. But what I saw sent my stomach tumbling to my feet. The trunk was empty. "Impossible," I whispered. I had heard them. I had felt the car bumping up and down from inside. I had seen it moving from the outside. My boss came out, face red with anger. I could tell he was about to scold me, probably fire me too. But Edward Smith stood between us and smiled.
Now, I don't want you to do anything to him. He took good care of my car after all. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I expect to see him here next time I visit,"
he said. He winked at me, a wink that made my skin crawl. My supervisor blundered out, Yes, of course." The police searched the car, then shot annoyed glances my way. I went home that night shaken by what had happened. I went through it in my head over and over again, but I just couldn't explain it. Was the car haunted? Had I felt an earthquake? Could lavender perfume make you hallucinate? A few weeks had passed, and I finally saw the car pulling up around the corner. At first, I thought it was him. I thought that entitled prick had come back to taunt me. But there was a bluish sheen to the paint, and the driver looked completely different. Just some random guy with the same exact car model as Edward. You know, this might sound weird, but even after weeks, I never forgot what Edward's trunk looked like. The image of the empty space stayed with me, nagging me every day. I could see it in my mind's eye so clearly that if I had any drawing skills whatsoever, I could have shown you exactly what it looked like in spectacular detail. The random patron with the same model car stepped out, but kept a hold of his key. He apologized as he ran around back to get something from his trunk. It was the same exact trunk. But then, I saw him reach around and pull a latch. The floor of the trunk retracted. There was a compartment underneath, just barely big enough to hold a person, if you broke a few bones and really crammed them in there. I promised them I'd get them out, I gave them false hope. And then I let them die. I'm an old man, living alone in an old house. My wife and I bought it 10 years ago, just before she passed away. I don't know how old it is. If I had to guess, I'd say at least 150 years. It's your typical old house, in the backcountry of the southern United States, surrounded by forests, and far from the closest neighbor. There's a lingering musky odor all around this house. I'm not sure if it's from the wood becoming rotten and moldy, or if it's exuding from my ever so slowly dying body. Its pipes and floorboards creak, just like my old bones and joints. I don't really have anybody in life. We never had children. I only have one family member left, a brother. But he suffers from dementia and I haven't seen him in ages. I'm living a tedious existence. Sometimes, as I meander aimlessly through the house's hallways and corridors, I see myself as no different than an ant, habitually moving through its nest, doing nothing more than what it needs to survive. Still duly serving its queen, even though it's been almost 10 years since she last drew breath. Sometimes I briefly forget that my wife is no longer with me, that I'm completely alone, in an old, decaying, dark, musky house. I've been trying to come up with chores to keep my mind busy. Yesterday, I decided to finally deal with the squeaky door hinges. Why not? Nothing better to do. I went searching through various cupboards and drawers trying to find the oil canister. It was nowhere to be found. But I stubbornly kept searching, and so started a much more manageable task for the day. Simply finding the oil canister. I eventually found myself in the attic going through old boxes. They had stayed in there unopened for some reason ever since we moved in. I found some of our old books, some utensils and cutlery, but no oil canister. And then I saw something else. I actually gasped in excitement. It was a heart-shaped pendant. I remember how widely I smiled. My wife had been looking for this pendant ever since we moved in. She considered it good luck and wore it all the time. She had thought she lost it forever. "Gloria!" I yelled down the stairs. She would have been so happy to know I found it. I couldn't wait to see her delight. You wouldn't believe what I just... Then I stopped. I took in a deep breath. I knew something was off. Something was wrong. But it was only slowly dawning on me. And then I fully remembered. Whenever this happens, it's like going through her death for the first time all over again. Gloria was no longer with me. And she hadn't been for a very long time. I hunched over, alone, in a dark, rotting attic. My joints aching in discomfort. I stared at the pendant, and I began to sob. I wept because I missed my wife. I wept at what my life had become. But mostly, I wept because I knew it would never get any better. I'd continue rotting away, living for nothing and for no one. Right up until it ended. I eventually pulled myself together. I held the pendant tightly and put it on. I grasped it as it hung around my neck. It actually made me feel better. I looked around carefully. I hadn't actually been up in this attic for years. I decided I would go through the other boxes and containers, just to see what else was up here. But before I could even get started, I noticed that some of the wood on the corner of the wall had rotted away. There was a small opening, about 6 square inches. I pointed my flashlight inside and noticed that there was actually a small room that had been closed off. I realized then that it had probably been at least 150 years since anyone had been inside. My curiosity piqued. The wood was so rotted in this area that the makeshift wall was barely even standing. It took about 10 minutes of effort, but using a hammer and a few well-placed kicks, I was able to create a hole large enough to crawl through. I took a deep breath and crept in. The first thing I noticed was that the air tasted ancient. It really had been a long time since anyone had been in there. I shined the flashlight briefly around the room to get my bearings. The next thing I noticed was the gun. A musket, to be exact. It appeared to be from the Civil War era. And on an old table there was a stack of currency. American $1 bills. The date said 1862, but I didn't recognize the man on it. He was fat and bald. I would have recognized any president of the United States, but this man had certainly never been president. I'd have to look that up later. There was also a stack of Confederate $5 bills. I did recognize the man on those bills. Jefferson Davis. But, while all that was very interesting, it's not what I came here to write about. First, I should mention the photographs. They were old, black and white, rotting from daguerreotype cameras. There were 6 different pictures in total, and they were all full-body portraits of 6 different individuals. But here's the strange thing. While the pictures were clearly taken in the 1860s, on one of the pictures a man is wearing clothes that appeared to be modern fashion. He was wearing jeans, sneakers, a hooded sweatshirt, and a baseball cap. His items of clothing were blank with no logo or picture on them. In all of the photographs, the people looking at the camera seemed expressionless. I have no idea how any of that is possible. I'm not sure if it was just some strange coincidence or if it's something more, but I don't want to get into any more detail about those photographs for now. Because what I found next was much, much worse. At the corner of the table was a brown case, 8 by 12 inches. It was around 4 inches thick. There was a black handle on the top, and some strange foreign language written on it. I opened it. Nothing could have prepared me for what I would see. I actually dropped it on the ground and screamed at what was in front of me. It was a very old photograph again. The edges had been rotting for decades. It was also black and white, and looked like it had been taken in the Civil War era. It was again a portrait of a man. And that man was me. Looking exactly like I currently do. Wearing the same pants and shirt I am currently wearing. The same haircut. The same facial hair. He was even wearing the same exact heart-shaped pendant that I only ever put on today. And standing beside me, in the photograph, was my wife. But it was not the wife that I remembered. No. It was my wife as she would look now. After rotting in the ground for the past 10 years. The clothes she was buried in had partly decomposed. Parts of her face had completely rotted away, but she was standing there, very much alive, arm around me, staring into the camera. I then heard something come from outside of the tiny room in the attic. I had terrible visions in my mind of my wife standing out there, looking as she does in the picture. But there was nothing out there. I think my mind was just playing tricks on me. I had been pretty shaken up, though. I decided to leave the attic for the time being, to think about all that's happened. It's now the next morning. I may have been scared at first, but I just spent 20 minutes writing this out. I was intending to ask for advice or guidance. Now I feel different. As though, as much as this is terrifying, it's also fascinating. For the first time in years, I feel interested in something. For the first time in years, I'm excited about what will happen today. To search for more. So I'm just gonna write this out now. And tonight, these old bones will break through a few more rotted walls in that attic. You never know what I'll find. I've lived in Arizona my whole life. I was born on my family's cattle ranch and I intended to die here one day. I know every nook and cranny of this property. I'd explored every inch of it by the time I turned 8. There ain't a single foxhole I don't know about, or a cactus I haven't been pricked by. For the past 3 years, since the last of my family died off and I never married, it's just been me alone here with my cattle and horses. I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like I said, I've been here my entire life. I know everything about this place. But today, I'm gonna tell you about the time I found a path out back that I had never seen before, and have never seen since. It was a sweltering hot day at the very start of monsoon season. The storms and rainfall hadn't quite set in yet, but I could tell they'd be coming any day now. Humidity hung thick in the air, tiring me out quicker than normal. That day I was herding the cattle back into their corral because they had been acting real strange, and I had a hunch maybe a pair of coyotes had migrated south, to test the waters. I had no intention of delivering them an easy meal. Me and No Name, my fastest horse, were making quick work of it, when one of my bigger bulls, Nico, broke away from the herd and went running towards the mountains. God damn it, I cursed. It would have been easier to handle the situation if I had another rancher with me, but since I was alone, I stayed with the herd and resigned myself to go after old Nico once the rest were safe in their enclosure. Half an hour later, I shut the gate to the cattle's enclosure and pulled on No Name's reins. He let out a protesting huff. I patted his flank firmly. I would have jumped on one of my other horses, but I knew No Name was the only one fast enough to catch up to Nico, what with the head start I had given him, that damn stubborn bull. Come on, boy, stay with me just a little longer. Tell you what, I'll give you the day off tomorrow. How's that sound? I knew he couldn't understand a word I had said, but he was a smart horse, and if nothing else, he understood the tone of my voice. He huffed again, but then strode towards the mountain range. I whistled the song I had gotten his name from as we trudged through the desert towards the copper mountains Nico was probably grazing on. On the mountain, old Nico was kind enough to leave a trail of broken twigs and trampled bushes to follow, but after roaming around for about an hour without finding him, I worried it was time to give up and head back. As much as I hated leaving old Nico out there overnight with the coyotes, it was getting near sundown and I was just going to have to take my chances. For all his grit and hard-headedness, Nico was a bit of a princess. I knew the second it started raining, he'd come running back home with his tail between his legs. I just hoped it would rain before the coyotes got to him. Whoa there, buddy. Come on. Let's head back, I ordered. No Name and I turned around. But instead of seeing the cactus and a pile of white rocks I expected to see next to the path leading down the mountain, I found thorny bushes and clay-covered soil. I wiped the sweat from my brow, examining the road curiously. Let me tell you, there's nothing weirder than seeing something that shouldn't be there. It was a sudden shock, like walking into a patio door you thought was open. I climbed off of No Name and walked over to the bushes to examine them. As I knelt down and checked, I could see the roots firmly nested under an undisturbed patch of soil. The bushes had been there for a while. Suddenly, No Name started huffing and hollering, and before I even had time to look, I heard the clomps of his hooves as he dashed past me and down the path. I felt the rush of air as he ran by. Irritated, I tossed my hat on the ground and cursed at him to come back. But he was spooked, and he wasn't slowing down. So there I was, alone on the mountain with one bull missing, no ride, and all my equipment, shotgun included, still strapped to No Name's saddle. It was going to be a long evening. I could only hope No Name would settle down somewhere on the mountain and take me the rest of the way home. Forgetting all about how wrong the path was, I put my hat back on and followed after my horse. The damned humidity had drenched me in sweat before I even trekked half a mile down. The sun was setting, but it was still searing hot. I was exhausted, starving, and most dangerously, I was thirsty. I hadn't taken a drink from my canteen since I locked the cattle in, and since I had tied the canteen to my saddle, I was shit out of luck. My mouth was pasty and dry with a few grains of sand from the dirt No Name had kicked into the air as he passed me. It was only when I stopped to catch my breath that I realized nothing looked familiar. Every rock formation was different. Every cactus was either too big or too small or even too crooked. And every path curved in places it shouldn't have curved. Hell, even as I looked out onto the horizon, at what should have been my property, I found myself feeling something like vertigo from how different everything was. That's when I heard a rustling from behind me, followed by a hungry huff of what must have been a coyote. I didn't want to face the vulture on my heels, so I took off down the path, hoping I'd be able to regain my bearings once I got off the mountain. Problem was, the more I ran, the more things seemed to warp around me. It wasn't just the landmarks that got me confused and turned around. It was my blurring vision making everything buckle and melt like one of them Dali paintings. I could feel my cheeks burning red, but I was starting to feel cold from the wind and the sweat-soaked rags I'd been wearing all day. I knew my body couldn't handle it much longer, but every time I stopped to catch my breath, I'd hear snarling and footsteps behind me. I remember how desperate I felt as I reached the bottom of the mountain and found myself still completely lost. I couldn't see my home, didn't have a clue which way to go, and even if I did, I didn't have the energy to walk anymore. With only a short 45 minutes of sunlight left, I decided to stay put for the night. I hoped a bit of rest and maybe some drink of the morning dew would be enough to bring me back to my senses. I gathered up some twigs and rocks and built myself a fire. That might seem strange to you considering how overheated I was, but as scorching hot as the desert is in the day, it can be just as cold at night, if not colder. And besides, I needed something to keep the coyotes from nipping at my heels. By the time I finished building myself a rudimentary bed out of the brush and gathering a few edible roots, I'd lost the last of the sunlight. My clothes were drying by the fire, and I laughed to myself as I imagined a ranger stumbling on me butt naked in the wilderness. He'd probably think I was out of my damn mind. As I lay there gnawing on the roots like a dog with a bone, I could hear coyotes prowling outside the light of my fire. They were growling and snarling, the sound of their hungry contemplation echoing in the valley. I'd shoo them away by hollering at them and throwing stones, but they'd always come back within minutes. I could see dozens of eyes watching me through the darkness. What in teenage mutant tarnation, I thought to myself as I peered into the darkness. I'd rarely ever see more than two together at a time. Coyotes don't usually hunt in packs. I was going to have to stay awake all night and tend to the fire, my only defense. My head had been dipping for a while when I heard a sickening sound outside of my camp. One of the coyotes was screaming and whining something awful. Accompanying the whimpers were short huffs and loud roars of another animal. Coyotes don't usually cannibalize one another, but they've been known to do it when they're desperate enough for a meal. I thought that's all it was, till I heard something trotting around, just out of view, followed by another coyote screaming from the other end of my camp. The pack scampered off in all directions. Anything that can make a coyote run, aside from the sound of my shotgun, is something I should run from too. Problem was, even if I got away, without my fire to keep me warm, I was just as good as dead out there in the valley. A light layer of frost had already formed over the rocks around me. Staying by the fire meant potentially becoming a prime meal for whatever was attacking the coyotes. But those flames were also my only protection I had, both from the elements and from the attacker. Then there was a huff to my left. How had it gotten there so fast? Another coyote screamed, and this time I got to see what had happened to it. Its entire body came tumbling towards me and stopped just a few inches from my feet. It had been completely eviscerated. Its hind leg was twitching wildly, but its eyes were lightless and dead. I looked in the direction the coyote had been thrown from and saw the silhouette of something large and deranged looking back at me. It walked on four long, stick-like legs that buckled in ways that legs shouldn't buckle. Its body was at least the size of a bull's, if not bigger, and the silhouette of it seemed to shift at every flicker of the fire. Its head was long and bony, and with two fiery eyes watching me like a lion stalking its prey, and it also had two horns coming straight out of what looked like matted hair. The creature's breaths came at regular intervals, a mix of a huff and the same snarly growl I had heard on the mountain. That's when I realized it wasn't a coyote chasing me earlier. It was this malevolent entity, whatever it was. I started running. I didn't even think about it. My body just did it on its own. What else was I supposed to do? If I was gonna die, at least I'd die on my own 2 feet, trying to survive. I could hear it on my heels, at times to my right and at others to my left. It was so fast, but it wasn't outrunning me. It gave me the distinct impression it was toying with me, like a cat playing with its food. The creature toyed with me like this for what felt like hours, and I was running on fumes and nearly delirious from dehydration. It never let up, but it also never drew closer to me. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I could see its shadow in the moonlight trampling through the bushes and kicking up dirt. My feet were sore, my head was spinning, my mouth was as dry as cotton, but I kept running and running and running, until I realized something. The way it was chasing me, it didn't just feel like a game. I knew those patterns. I recognized the technique. I was being herded like cattle. The sad thing was, even if I knew what was happening, there was no breaking away from it because every time I tried changing directions, I'd hear it on my flank, already blocking the way. If there had been even a lick of water left in my body, I think I would have lost it all to tears at that point. But, just as I lost hope, just as the adrenaline wore off and I started slowing down, I saw a light ahead of me. It was my ranch. I was almost there. Just a bit farther. One last push and I'd be safe. I could barely walk, let alone run. But somehow, with the creature threatening to rip me to shreds on my tail, I managed to jog. I made it to the gate, pushed it open in one fell swing and stumbled inside, listening for the click of it as it closed behind me. I didn't think of anything except for the basin of water my cattle drank from. I plunged my face into it and drank greedily, completely ignoring the taste and thoughts of bacteria that could be swimming in it. My stalker let out a huff, reminding me of its presence. I turned around slowly, water dripping from my face, and I looked at my pursuer, now bathing in the lights around the enclosure. The lights I used to help scare away predators. The creature rose up on its hind legs, towering over the fence as its hooved front legs batted at the air in invisible circles. The creature was more terrifying than I could ever imagine. A horse with sunken eyelids, rotten flesh, and a frayed mane. Its legs were all bone, with a few ligaments holding them together. It had large buck teeth permanently visible on its nearly skinless face. It looked wild. It looked powerful. It looked familiar. No name? I whispered. The creature's front legs connected with the ground, sending out a light plume of dust in every direction. It huffed once more and then it walked away into the night. I don't really remember going inside after that, but I woke up on the couch covered in filth and still butt naked. As I looked out towards the stalls, I saw No Name standing in his pen with the door wide open. I suppose you could say it was all in my head. You could say I imagined No Name as a monster in the night. You could say I was delirious from heat stroke, sure. But if it was all just in my head, then how would you explain the eviscerated coyote carcasses I found strewn about my property the next morning? My name is Benjamin, and I'm an astrophysicist. I may have just made a profound discovery, though I doubt that I'm the only one. Surely, right now, hundreds of scientists are coming to the same exact conclusions. You could check for yourselves if you don't believe me. Just wait until it gets dark, and then head outside. Of course, unless you're a trained astronomer with your star charts handy, the odds are that you might not notice anything strange at all. My role in all this started only a few hours ago, although it feels like far longer. I was taking readings of the cosmic background radiation in my university's observatory. when I noticed something odd on one of the monitors. A patch of sky was being analyzed by some software, likely initiated by one of my colleagues. I noticed a sudden drop in the signal. If I hadn't let my eyes wander over to the screen at that exact moment, I might not have seen anything at all. The signal didn't drop out entirely. It just decreased sharply and suddenly in magnitude. Where before, the digital telescope's pixels were reading ones, they were now reading zeros. To put this in layman's terms as best I can, the stars had gone dark, but only a few of them. I looked around the building and the break room trying to find the person who belonged to the data, but I was completely alone. At this point, it was no more than a curiosity to me. Since my own data was still compiling and since my favorite online card game was blocked by the university's firewall, I decided to head up to the roof to do some basic observations. I'm an astrophysicist, not an astronomer, so I spend far more time gazing at computer screens than at the stars themselves. But I remembered a bit of my undergraduate credits and dusted off the rooftop optical telescope. I did my best to find the patch of sky that had experienced the sudden signal loss. I believed that I had found it, but it was unremarkable, and I couldn't tell if anything was amiss at all. I hate to say it, but I gave up then and there. Since I still had some time while my data compiled, I decided to be nostalgic and give the heavens a quick scan. I peered at my favorite constellations, or at least the ones I remembered. First, I located Polaris, the star which through an accident of axial precision was in a near-perfect position to guide mankind north for hundreds of years. I checked out the Gemini twins, Castor and Pollux, brothers to Helen of Troy and inspiration to the two-man space flights in the early 60s. Then, I looked to Orion, one of the first constellations that a freshman astronomer will pick out. I traced out the form of the hunter, the way I had learned long ago. Orion's left shoulder was Betelgeuse, a strangely reddish star. His other shoulder was Bellatrix. Orion's right foot was... Wait. It was missing. I remembered that this was supposed to be the star Rigel, a distant, high-energy supergiant. I couldn't find it anywhere. Stranger still, Orion's belt, that famous straight line of stars, didn't look quite right either. Confused, I kept looking at the stars, wishing I had retained more of my undergrad astronomy. I looked for the brightest stars visible from my position on the globe. Everything seemed fine. Capella was there. Sirius, the dog star, was shining brightly. But then I noticed that Canis Major, the constellation containing Sirius, was incomplete. The dog had no tail. I couldn't for the life of me remember that star, so I ran downstairs, past the laboratory where my data was probably ready, to an unlocked classroom. I grabbed a textbook off the shelf and started skimming. After a few minutes, I found it. The missing star was Aludra, a distant star remarkable for its stability. My triumph was short-lived, however, because I had no idea what it all meant. No Rigel, no Aludra, and a general sense of wrongness in the sky. I needed more data. I grabbed some more materials from the classroom. I intended to return them, but I'm just now realizing that I forgot. Oh well. I ran back up to the roof and started going over my observations with the proper reference materials. The two stars that I had noticed missing were Rigel and Aludra. However, other stars such as Betelgeuse, Capella, and Polaris were all present and accounted for. I looked for an index of stars and finally saw a pattern. The missing stars were further away than the others. Even though they both make up parts of Orion's body, Betelgeuse and Rigel are hundreds of light years distant. I spent rest of the evening doing a systematic survey of the night sky. Unfortunately, there was an entire hemisphere between me and half of the visible stars, but I gave it my best shot anyway. My initial theory was confirmed. The stars that were furthest away from the Earth were missing. But I refined my observations. Using the optical telescope and my basic star charts, I took these data points down to the lab and started building a computer model. I used a 3D map of the galaxy and plotted out the missing stars. That's when I noticed it. The data points all fell outside a certain radius. There was a nearly perfect sphere of stars, with everything outside of it having simply vanished. An interstellar radius, hundreds of light years wide, was trapping all the visible stars and shutting out all the others. Since that discovery, I haven't been able to stop myself from coming up with crazy explanatory theories. Were the stars all destroyed? No, they couldn't have gone nova. We would have seen it. That colossal release of energy probably would have destroyed the Earth anyway. Had a chunk of the galaxy simply been trapped in a giant sphere, it fit the data, but it was crazy. What could do that? Who could do that? And why? Does the sphere imply intelligence, or is it just a natural phenomenon? Maybe we weren't in the Milky Way at all anymore. Perhaps our little sphere of stars was removed, teleported, if you will, out of the galaxy. But that was just as impossible as anything else. I've taken some sleeping pills to quiet my mind, if nothing else. I'm sure that by the time I wake up, the entire scientific community will be abuzz with this information. But I'll leave you with a few things before I leave. The sphere, or whatever it is, outside of which all the stars have gone out. Don't be narcissistic and think that it's centered on the Earth. I plotted the sphere, and while Earth is inside of it, we are not at the center. The perfect center, as best as I can tell from my data, is an unremarkable G-class star located several hundred light years from Earth, known to me only through a search of these stellar catalogs. I have no idea what any of this means. Finally, and possibly the most disturbing thought I've had all night, is this. Because of the speed at which light travels, and because of the radius of the sphere, whatever happened to make the stars go dark? It happened over 700 years ago.